Welcome. We are continuing on with our Unit 2 review. We're talking about interactions among branches of government. Continuing on with the federal court system, right? The judicial branch. Topic 2.10 is the court in action. So we're continuing on talking about the independence, legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And today we're really going to be focusing on what can happen if the court makes an unpopular decision. Right? So our enduring understanding is up here. It hasn't really changed from the previous topics relating to the judicial branch. Our learning objective is different. So this is what students are expected to do, that students can explain how the exercise of judicial review in conjunction with life tenure can lead to debate about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court's power, right? So we are talking about the exercise of judicial review, right? The fact that the courts have the power to review actions of the president and Congress and can review them and can view them unconstitutional. They can rule them to be unconstitutional, unfit with their understanding of the Constitution, and strike those actions down. Could be laws, could be executive orders, executive agreements, any actions of the president and or Congress, right? Life tenure, right? We know that judges are appointed for life. They're appointed by the president, confirmed by with a majority vote by the Senate, and they serve for life. So they cannot be removed unless by impeachment. Impeachment is the only way that they can be removed from office, right? So this can often lead to the debate about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court's power. Particularly what happens if the court makes an unpopular decision, right? So controversial, this is the essential knowledge, the must knows, right? Controversial or unpopular court decisions. All right, so I'll highlight this real quick. Can lead to challenges of the court's legitimacy, calling into question the legitimacy of the court, right? And the power that Congress and the president can address only through future appointments. Talk about this here in a second. Legislation changing the court's jurisdiction. Talk about that also. I'm going to explain this. Or refusing to implement decisions. Talk about that too, right? So these decisions, what happens when the court makes an unpopular decision? Right? And Roe v. Wade, very unpopular amongst the pro-lifers, right? The groups, the religious groups, the conservative groups that tended to be pro-life. There was a lot of debate about that. A woman's right to privacy, right? Right to privacy is not granted in the Constitution, not specifically listed in the Constitution, but it's inherent through other powers granted in the Constitution, specifically the First Amendment, Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, the 10th Amendment, Ninth and 10th Amendments, right? So this right to privacy that includes a woman's right to choose whether to have an abortion. It strikes down the Texas state law banning abortions in the state of Texas, right? So what happens? What can be done about that, right? It's going to call into question the court's legitimacy and power, right? That can only be changed in a few ways. So what can happen if an unpopular decision is made? Well, the first thing I think, if we got down here to the bottom, is that the president and or Congress are often relied upon to carry out and enforce the court's decisions. Right? We look at the Brown versus Board decision, overturning segregation in the South, overturning segregated facilities in the South. Very unpopular in the South, right? So what happens? Well, the southern states, the southern governors and the southern states refuse to implement it. They refuse to carry it out. And it's really not until President Eisenhower sends down the troops to Little Rock Central High School. Congress passes the Civil Rights Act in 1964, 10 years later, 9 years later, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, right? So that's important. Future appointments. President can look to make appointments, right? If justices retire, resign, give up their seat, right? They can only be removed by impeachment, but if there's a vacancy, the president can look to replace those judges with other ideological judges. And legislation, Congress can pass legislation that changes the court's jurisdiction. Congress is responsible for the jurisdiction of the